colleagues from the Crossroads Center. Of course, Councilmember Wendell Young, City Council, Councilmember Jan-Michelle Lemon-Kearney, School Board Member and also Policy Director for Cradle Cincinnati, Mike Morofsky, Representative Bridget Kelly, Representative Jessica Miranda, Representative Cedric Benson, Representative Catherine Ingram, from Reverb Art and Design, Leo DeCruz, from the YWCA of Greater Cincinnati, Barbara Perez, and we'll kind of stand the mic here, and of course, Senator Cecil Thomas, our great senator and former council member. And again, you'll be hearing from many of the folks who were just acknowledged. We live in a country where there is danger and added risk to be black while driving, black while jogging, black while pregnant, black while living in a predominantly black neighborhood, black while in America. So yes, it is right and it is necessary, as many of our counterparts, elected officials have done, for the people's government to declare that racism is a public health crisis. And on behalf, with Councilmember Kearney, Councilmember Young, on behalf of the City of Cincinnati, that's what we've come here to do today. We're very intentional in choosing the spot for this announcement, right near the border of two Cincinnati neighborhoods, Avondale and North Avondale, that share a name, but do not share the same health and opportunity outcomes. Racism being a public health crisis is a major reason why, heartbreakingly and unacceptably, we see neighborhood and zip code dictating life expectancy. We do not want to be, and we cannot let ourselves be a city where your years on this earth and the opportunities you are afforded are the results of a difference of a half a mile. These gaps and disparities didn't just come about randomly. They are a direct result of racism and systems of inequity. And that's why it's necessary for government to step in. I'm going to be very brief in my remarks here and quickly turn things over to my excellent colleagues. But there's one thing that's very important for me to make clear today. And that is that this resolution, this declaration, is not meant simply to be words on paper, to be a resolution without teeth. That is why we have come together with valued partners like the Center for Closing the Health Gap, the YWCA, Cradle Cincinnati, Reverb, our own city health department, and many others, to also propose specific policy recommendations, and that will be the real work ahead of us. It's not just about making a declaration, it's about making change. Some of those things, based on expert feedback we've gotten from our partners, include expanded prenatal care, greater lead testing and abatement, community-based agriculture to help alleviate food deserts. And I should also mention that while those things pertain specifically to health, I'll also note the city has worked to advance other policies and initiatives to make progress relative to minority entrepreneurship, minority contracting, bail reform, marijuana laws, and more. We want to again thank all of our partners who are here today and who you'll hear from, and I'm now delighted to hand it over to my colleague who dazzles this city every day and continues to do extraordinary work, Councilmember Jan-Michelle Lemon-Kearney.
That's a high standard. So, no. Thank you, Councilmember Sittenfeld. I'm really, okay, thank you, Councilmember Sittenfeld. I'm really, okay, did I mess this up? I'm sorry. I've got somebody's mic here, okay. All right. So I'm really honored to be here in solidarity with Councilmember Sittenfeld, Councilmember Young, many of our county commissioners. I guess I'll just keep talking through the traffic. I guess that's how it works outside, right? And our state legislators standing in unity to declare racism a public health crisis. You know, P.G. Sittenfeld called me actually several months ago and said that he received some information from Renee Mahaffey-Harris at the Center for Closing the Health Gap, and it's work that they've been doing for a long time, so I'm excited that she's here speaking today. But it's work they've been doing for a long time, and she sent information to us as a city and to the county and to the state to show that, you know, systemic racism is a public health crisis. And the Center for Closing the Health Gap has been talking about this for years. I think when COVID-19 came, we all paid even more attention, although PG was talking about this even before COVID-19 came. But when COVID-19 came, and we lost so many loved ones in our community, of all different, ages and races, but then we saw that the black and brown communities were hardest hit. We realized that, there were health disparities. There were comorbidities, like, there was more obesity and more diabetes and more hypertension in the black community. And that so many people in our communities couldn't stay at home. They couldn't do shelter in place. They had jobs where they had to be out working. Their businesses couldn't get PPP, and so they closed. There were so many issues. Our children fell behind in education. Some of them didn't have computers. They didn't have internet access. So many disparities. And so we had to look at that and say, we are in a crisis, and COVID-19 showed us that. So, the question is, and people keep saying, so what is systemic racism? What does that mean? And it's pretty simple, but it goes really deep. And it just means that there are systems and policies in place that create and maintain racial inequality. And that goes into almost every facet of the lives of black and brown people. There's an author, Kimberly Jones, and I love her example. She used a game of Monopoly to show systemic racism. So picture this. Everybody played Monopoly. We all played a lot of Monopoly. We still do at our house. So picture that for 400 turns, you cannot have a turn. So everybody's taking a turn, but for 400 turns, you don't get to play. You don't get to move your little piece. For me, it was always a little dog. You don't get to move that piece around the board. You don't get to pass go. You don't get to collect $200 for 400 turns. And then you get 50 more turns. Okay, now it's your turn to play, but there's certain rules in place. If you make any money, you have to give it to the other players. You can't buy a house. You can't buy one of those hotels. You can't do any of that, but you can just kind of move around the board. So then the question is, how can you win? How can you win? How can you win? And that is the question that we ask with systemic racism. How can you win against obesity and hypertension and diabetes if you're living in a food desert, and that's where we are now? How can you win if black students are 3 times as likely to get expelled from schools as white students for the same incidents? And that makes them 8 times more likely to end up being incarcerated later. How can you win by staying out of the criminal justice system if you're more likely to be stopped by the police because you're black? How can you win if your sentences for jail time are 20% more than everybody else? How can you win? How can you win if you're trying to grow a small business, but you don't have access to capital? How can you win? The answer is, you can't win. You cannot win. You cannot win until the system is changed. And so that is why we are here today, to change the system, to make positive change, to do away with systemic racism. And you know what? At the end of that, we're going to have a system in place that is healthier and more prosperous for everybody in our community, everybody in our city, our county, and our state. That is what we're working for. Thank you.
The official legislation, the resolution, is being co-sponsored by Councilmember Kearney, Councilmember Young, and myself. I'd be remiss, by way of introducing Councilmember Young, if we didn't acknowledge that he has been, over really a decade, the leader on this work.
You're now hearing from Councilmember P.D. Sittenfeld there as they're continuing this press conference. The Cincinnati leaders have now introduced resolution declaring racism a public health crisis in the city. We're streaming this live. I just want to let you know right now. We have to dip out of it for time purposes, but it's still happening, and we're streaming it right now on our digital platforms.
Councilman Wendell Young coming to the podium there. We will take a quick break. Be back.